Cruz. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your service. Congratulations on your nominations. Ambassador Sisson, let me start with you. You have emphasized repeatedly that you intend to work to ensure that American taxpayer dollars are well spent at the UN and other organizations. But Americans are deeply concerned about the structure and leadership of those organizations. Organizations like the Human Rights Council are hopelessly biased, especially against the nation of Israel, and they're mendaciously sympathetic to countries like Iran that commit atrocious human rights abuses. It is no surprise why that's the case, given that those are the sorts of countries that make up a majority of the members of the Human Rights Council. To take another example, the UN's Commission on the Status of Women, the body's top legislative body on women's rights, recently elected Iran as a member. The Iranian regime, of course, enforces a broad array of gender apartheid policies. And concerningly, when asked, the Biden administration declined to condemn that farce. I worry that no amount of financial accountability can reform these deeply problematic organizations as long as we allow them to be led by countries that are antithetical to their purpose. I'd like your opinion on that. How can financial oversight, which you've discussed, fix these deep problems, especially if the Biden administration is unwilling to speak out clearly against them?
Senator, the issue of U.S. leadership is critical, I believe, to addressing the need for reform. And I agree with you. There is a need for reform in many of these institutions. We need the U.S. back at the table pushing for these reforms. There is the issue, yes, of financial accountability, transparency, oversight, but there is also the issue of U.S. leadership building strong cross-regional partnerships and alliances so that our U.S. core values, protection of human rights, labor rights, economic transparency, are at the forefront. We need to remind some of our like-minded of what we all signed on to in the Charter of the United Nations, because its foundational document is strong on the human rights. On the Human Rights Council, Senator, I do believe that when we are at the table and as we are coming back to the HRC, we have the ability to better defend Israel from delegitimization, from unfair targeting, from discriminatory efforts, because we are there and we are present. We have seen when we are there that the number of items brought up under this article, Agenda Item 7, the only single country targeting of Israel, in that space, that we're able to push back. By coming back also, and of course with our candidacy, better able to create these cross-regional alliances to encourage more human rights, right-minded countries to come up as members. But does the
hypocrisy of some of the worst human rights abusers being themselves members, does that concern you?
Indeed, it does. But we have also seen, Senator, that the Human Rights Council has put the spotlight on Venezuela. The Human Rights Council has put the spotlight on China, and the treatment of Uyghurs has put the spotlight on Hong Kong. So the issue of our people-to-people diplomacy, creating these strong cross-regional alliances of like-minded countries to make sure that our core U.S. values are at the forefront. This is why we need to be at the table and back.
Thank you. Ambassador Nichols, I'd also like to ask you briefly about Mexico. And our relationship with Mexico is complicated. They're a neighbor. We share a land border, but they're also a country with its own interest. And when it comes to foreign policy, we need to use all the foreign policy tools we have. Recently, the Mexican government has taken a range of steps to downgrade counter-narcotics cooperation with the United States. And in one incident, Mexico even released sensitive information that we provided to them in violation of the U.S.-Mexico Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. I've introduced legislation to try to address some of these concerns. But of course, there's an enormous role for the State Department to play in conveying American concerns and priorities. Do you also share these concerns with Mexico's behavior in connection with cooperation with the United States in counter-narcotics and treaty violations? And how should we address those issues?
Our cooperation with Mexico on rule of law, counter-narcotics, justice issues is vital. It's long-standing. I had the pleasure of working on those issues when I was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. If confirmed, I look forward to engaging proactively with the government of Mexico on our security cooperation. It's vital for both of our nations. Mexican cooperation is something that we need and they need. The challenges, as was discussed in terms of things like fentanyl and precursors, other opiate trafficking into the United States, illegal activities on the border. We need each other to resolve those, and I look forward to working with our law enforcement colleagues on the U.S. side, with our Embassy Law Enforcement Working Group in Mexico City, and with Mexican officials, if confirmed, to press forward to ensure the highest level of cooperation, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.